Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for joining me. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to color a cute unicorn. This is the Inkon3 Magical Unicorn, and I am just in love with this. A Fluorette Bloom from Inkon3 reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in coloring this in for her, and I seriously could not contain my excitement. I really, really love the stamp set, and I love it for quite a few reasons, but we'll talk about that more in just a few moments. In the meantime, I have a piece of Express a Blending card. I have this cut down to 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, and I have the stamp just centered right there on this panel. I am going to be using the Inkon3 Fadeout ink for this. Of course, I'm going to be doing some no line coloring, and the Fadeout ink is my favorite and perfect for this. I am going to be double stamping this, or I think maybe I might have triple stamped it. I wanted to make sure that it showed up nice for you here on the video, so I did stamp this a couple times just to be sure, and then I'm going to dive right into my coloring. Now, when I was trying to decide what colors I wanted to do this unicorn in, I decided I wanted to go pretty light. Now, one of the reasons why I love the stamp is because the sky is the limit with color palette on this. I, however, wanted to have this unicorn's face a little bit on the lighter side, but I still wanted it to be just a wee bit brown. So I am starting with the E35, and I have it right up there on the tip of my marker, and I'm going right up underneath where that hair is hanging over her face here. Just a really nice thin line to start with. I will bring that more out in just a moment. I'm going to go right up alongside her face on both sides. Again, right now I'm keeping those lines pretty thin, just kind of getting them in there. Some of this I am kind of eyeballing it as I go to kind of get a feel for the shape. So I'm just going in with these nice thin lines, and I can always go in and add more when I need to, and I actually do. So I had it right up underneath the lower lip here. So when I'm done coloring this in, it's going to look like the lower lip kind of rolls back up underneath her chin. It is going to be a little bit rounded. And I also did bring in a little bit of this E35 in towards the center of that lip to kind of make those look a little bit more rounded. I am also going right up alongside the bridge of the nose here, or the front of this nose, and I'm adding a little bit of that E35 there, darken that up a little bit so it does look like it rounds back just a wee bit. Now I'm bringing this E35 back up here along this hairline, or where this hair overlaps the face. And before I go any further, I am going to bring in a dark gray Stettler pen, and I am tracing over the eye here and the eyelashes. I almost forgot to do it when I started my coloring, and it would totally get lost once I started coloring over the top of that. Plus, it's going to help define more of that shape so I can continue to add my colors as I go here. Now I have the E35, the E33. I'm going right over the top of that E35, and I'm bringing that out just a little bit more. Now I am taking care to blend this out more than what I typically do. Now, sometimes I'm really guilty about just getting my colors in there and I don't focus on my blend as much as I need to, but it's really important with this one because we are going to fade this out to a white. Now, this is going to look like a very light tan horse with the amount of white I leave in it, but I need that blend to be nice and smooth with these colors in order to do that. Otherwise, it's going to look really choppy. I also brought that E33 up along the bridge of that nose and brought that in. That line is not illustrated in there. You could skip that if you would like. The reason why I did it is going to give a little bit more shape there to that bridge, and I feel like it's a little important to do that, and it's pretty easy to add that in there. Once I was done with that E33, now I'm coming in with the E31, going right over the top of the 35, the 33, and bringing that out just a little bit more. You can see how much more I've brought that out there. I'm also going to make sure that I finish coloring in that lip there, right there at the tip of that nose. I bring that E31 up a little bit. When I'm done coloring this in, it's going to look like that recedes in just a wee bit. It's just kind of giving a little bit more shape and definition to my unicorn here. I'm also bringing that in further there at the center of that bridge, so I can kind of draw that in just a wee bit so it doesn't look so straight and wide. I'm also going to bring this E30 E31 up along the sides here. Now you can still see I have quite a bit of white left. If you wanted to color this horse in completely, or the unicorn in completely with your colors, that's totally fine. You don't need to color it like I am. This is a really good technique to do. However, if you're worried about leaving that white in there, just color it all in. It's just fine. You're going to be adding more than what I have done here, but it's still totally doable. Once I was done with that E31, I now have this E30. This is my lightest color here, and I am going over the top of all of the colors I have just done. Now again, I'm trying to get these blended as well as I possibly can. So I bring that up there at the bottom of that nose, going up towards the bridge. I'm bringing this in quite a bit in from the bridge of the nose. I filled in those edges along the horse's, I guess it would be the jawline. I've brought that up along there, but I still have quite a bit of white space left. I'm also going to finish coloring in this eye with that E30 as well. And I did add some more shading and shadow in with that E35 and the E33 along that eye there. Now, to kind of get some of this to move back a little bit and blend out just a wee bit better to the white, I do have my colorless blender, and it might be a little hard to see here in the video, but I'm actually taking the colorless blender from the white paper in towards the color, not the color out towards the white paper. This will kind of help smooth it out there along those edges where the flicks would have been left on the paper. If you go from the ink out, it actually just starts breaking up at that ink line, and you don't want it to do that. Now, before I go any further on this horse, I do need to get his nose colored in because I need to blend this nose in with the rest of the coloring on this. So I'm starting with the C5. I just kind of traced along that line there that is illustrated, and I'm going to bring it out just a tiny bit more, as you can see there. Now I'm bringing in my C3. I'm going to go right over the top of that C5, blend that out. I still looks like I have quite a bit left, but I actually don't. I'm going to bring in the C1, go over the top of the C5 and the C3, blend that out pretty well, and then I'm going to finish this off with my C00, and at this point I am going to bring this out almost to that brown that I have in there. There would not actually be a line or a gap between those two colors, so I need them to blend together. So after I'm done with that C00, now I can bring in this E30 again, and I'm going to go from the edge of that nose in towards those nostrils and over the top of everything that I just colored. So it's going to kind of turn them a little bit more brown, but it's also going to help them blend together perfectly. Now I felt like I still had a few harsh lines left here, so I'm bringing that that colorless blender back in again. Now at any point I can come back in with that colorless blender, but I'm not going to hit it all at once because I want to do a little bit at a time, let it dry, and then I can go back to it. To kind of tie in some more of this gray here that I used on the nostrils, I'm going to do the ears in the same color. It's pretty much the same approach. I'm bringing in that C5 just where I feel like that darkest shadow would be there, so along the ridge of that ear, kind of down where some of these flowers are, just a tiny bit. It doesn't need a whole lot. There would probably be a good deal of light reaching those ears because they're unicorn ears and they're not exactly small. So I don't need a whole lot of that C5, and I actually don't even need a whole lot of the C3. I need just enough of it to blend out that C5 and then bring it out just a tiny bit more. Nothing too exciting, but I do want to make sure again that I have a really good blend here. I am not paying attention to light source. I'm just thinking how much light could be hitting this area. Hopefully that makes sense. After I'm done with the C3, I'm coming in with the C1, and I'm only blending this out just a tiny bit more. Again, you can still see that I have lots of white left there, and that's perfect. That's exactly what I need. Now, I grabbed my C markers primarily because I need to refill my W's, but if I were to do this again, I would actually go with the warm grays instead of the cool grays to go with the warmth of the horse itself or the unicorn itself. However, the cool grays work just fine, and I'm going to show you a few tricks here on how I'm going to warm those up quite a bit, and they won't look so stark against the the browns of the unicorn. And just like I did with the nostrils, I'm finishing that off with the C00. And again, I made sure that those were a nice, even blend there. So now there's some little tiny sections of the unicorn's ears here that need to be colored in. I'm starting with that E35 and I'm going right along the edge of the flowers and the leaf there and just drawing in these fine little lines. Now I'll bring in that E33 and kind of bring that in more towards myself. Again with the E31 to finish filling that in, and I am going to finish it off with the E30 just to kind of get the same tone as I have on the unicorn's face, but it's not going to really do a whole lot outside of just getting that tone, and that is just fine. So now I'm going to start coloring in her mane, and I'm going to be honest with you folks, hair is something that I do, it's not something I think. So I might ride the struggle bus a little bit on how I can explain on what it is I'm doing. It's just literally, it's something that I do. I eyeball it as I go, and that's all there is to it. So here we go. I'm starting with the E59, and I'm going in where the darkest shaded areas would be, or where I would have a cast shadow, because we have that headpiece up there, and it's going to be casting some shadow along that mane. Now I do want this mane pretty dark because those flowers are going to be colored in pretty dark. I already knew what color the flowers were going to be before I even started this. So I knew automatically that I needed to have a darker mane in order to make this work. Now I am taking the tip of my marker and I'm going right up along the lines that are already illustrated in this image. However, I'm going to start adding some extra ones to it. I start right there at the tip of where that mane hangs down and I move my way up, and I do it that way because that is the most natural direction for me to get those long strokes. They don't have to be even, they don't have to be perfect. You don't want the wonky and all over the place, but I do want a fairly fluid motion as I do this. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to start adding some more, but I'm going to start making some of these curve towards some of those first lines that I have already done and meet up with those, and then I can fill those in. Now these are going to look like darker hairs. They're going to start looking like there is some shadow being casted by the lighter hairs and this heavy mane that is on this unicorn as I start to color this in, and you'll see more of that as I move along. At this point, I really only eyeball this. I stop every once in a while and I look at it and I ask myself, do I need to add more? Can I add more? Like right now, I'm looking at this and thinking, how much more dark do I want to add to this? Now I decide that I'm good to go, so I'm bringing in my E57. I am going right over the top of those E59s. It's going to seem kind of crazy because it almost feels like there isn't a rhyme or reason to it, but I need it to get those E59s to blend in there. I do also add a few more strands, darker strands with this E57, but not much. I don't want to eat up all of my light area because I do need to have some highlights, some lighter colored hairs in this in order to look like it has movement and it has some dimension to it. Once I'm done with that E57, now I'm coming in with the E55. I'm going right over the top of the 59 and the 57 with this, and then I'm going to start filling this in a little bit more. Now that I'm starting to fill this in more, I can start doing shorter flicking strokes with my marker as opposed to just those long stretches of coloring on the paper. Once I'm done with that 55, I'm coming in with the 53, and now I'm really, at this point, I'm starting to eat up all of that white paper that I had left over. I am going to bring in an E50 and finish this out. Now, I know that this is a lot of markers. You don't always need this many markers to color in hair, or in this case, a mane. You don't. I like to have all of those colors to work my way down to. It kind of helps me work things out and decide what direction I want to go with the hair. Because again, hair is just something I do. It's not something I think about. It's one of those things I have to eyeball it. And if I try to come up with a plan, it never works with hair or manes. So this is just how I do it. And I wanted to share it with you folks in case this is new to you, or in case you struggle with it. Maybe you'll learn something new from it. Maybe by going the long way, if it will eventually help you go the shorter route. I don't know. All right, so at this point, I'm just kind of tinkering with it. I am definitely not going back in with any 59 or any 57. That would be way, way too much. But I do kind of go back and forth between the 55, the 53, and the 50 until I get it where I want it. And then I leave it because I also know that I'm going to be coming in with my colored pencils to be adding some more detail and a few other shades as well. So at this point, I can just kind of step away from it. Now I can do the mane along the side of the unicorn's head here. This one might give you a little bit better idea of exactly how I did this, although I do speed this up a little bit. I am very slow when I do this. Now, granted, there is actually quite a bit of white space here to get colored in. I'm just really slow as it is, but hopefully this will give you a really good idea. You can see where I'm meeting some of those lines up. I'll draw in that straight line. Sometimes as I'm drawing in that straight line, I'll see something next to it and I'll think, okay, yes, I can connect that here. I can start filling that in there. This is going to give me shadow. Once I start filling that in, I can leave this portion for a highlight. Mid-tones here would look good. I do want some separation between that larger chunk of the mane that's hanging on the side there and the smaller chunk that's hanging down beside it. So I am keeping that in mind as I color that in, and I know that I'm going to be adding some more shade there just like I'm doing right now. Now when it curves away from her head or back behind her head, I do make sure that I bring in that 55 and add some flicks in there and bring it towards the front. So that's going to make it look like it's curving away from us when this is all colored in. Again, I'm just kind of eyeballing this and seeing where it's going to take me. Now, I don't color in manes or hair very often, but I have done it enough that I can just kind of wing it and eyeball it and see which direction I want to go with it. And I know how it should look. And I also know what my markers are going to do. I know what these colors are going to do. I know what they're all about. I know when I start blending them together what colors I'm going to get out of that. And that definitely helps a bunch. I also know what colored pencils I'm going to be bringing in after I'm done with my Copic coloring. So that kind of also tells me what direction I should go as I'm coloring this in. And again, hopefully this is going to make more sense to you as we move along here. So instead of, at this point, instead of having two large chunks of mane here along the side of the unicorn, I now look like I have some variation and they're different lengths and it's a better blend overall. Now, again, I am going to tinker with it just a little bit, not too much, because again, I know that I'm going to be coming in with my colored pencils, but I am going to kind of tinker with it a little bit as it starts to dry, and I'm definitely giving it time to dry back just a little bit before I do any more work to it. It's kind of hard to tell that here in the video because I edited the wait time out of it, but I do kind of sit here and let it dry back a little bit before I go in and do anything else to it. And then I also reach a point where I know that I just need to move on from it and I can address the rest of it with my colored pencils. So in the meantime, I am going to color in the horn here, and this is my favorite part of the whole thing. I am starting with the Y28. I'm going in where I know I'm going to have some darker shaded areas. These flowers here are going to be casting a little bit of shadow, and they are covering up the bottom portion of this horn. So I am adding quite a bit of that Y28 to that. I did map out the separation between the sections on these horns with a very fine line of the Y28, and as I go up towards the top, I have a longer flick, and as I go down towards the bottom, I'm leaving it a shorter flick. I don't want it to eat up all of this white space, plus I want to make sure that they have a nice rounded look to them, so they're still connected like a horn would be, but they still need to be on the round side. Once I'm done with that Y28, now I'm bringing in the YR23. Now these ones down here on the bottom, I'm virtually going to cover those up all together with that YR23. Again, we have those flowers. They're primarily covering them up, so they're not going to have a lot of light to them. They're going to be pretty dark. But as I go up towards the top, again, I have a longer flicking motion going towards the top, shorter coming towards the bottom, but I am taking this YR23 and I am at the very tip of my marker going along the edges of the horn, so I can start getting that rounded appearance along the edges, not just directly up the center. Now I'm going to finish this off with the YR21, and I'm not going to scrub, I'm not going to oversaturate that with the YR21 because that will lift that YR23 and that Y28. As it is, I lost a little bit of that darkness there, so I am coming back in with that Y28 just there on the tip of my marker, adding in some of those heavier lines with that, and then I'll go over it one more time with that YR23, especially down here where these flowers are overlapping this horn, to kind of get that color back in there just a wee bit. And I'll give it one last quick wash with that YR21, and then I'm going to call it good. I don't need to overwork this because, again, I'm going to be bringing in my colored pencils and be adding more of that depth and that detail back in with those, and I'm going to get a lot more detail in with those as it is. Okay, so I am ready to start coloring in the flowers on this headpiece here. I'm going to start with these plumerias that are right here along the right hand side. And I'm only going to do a very simple 2-color blend on these. They're not very big. They don't need a whole lot. I'm starting with this RV13, and I'm right up there on the tip of my marker. It's probably kind of hard to see exactly where I'm at, but when I pull my hand away, take a look. There's like these ridges on a plumeria that kind of stick up and out, and I don't want any of that RV13 there. So I'm running right along the edge there down into that V, and I go up a little bit along one side, and then the side that goes on, that comes out and curves towards the tip of the petal, I'm adding some of that RV13 there, but I'm keeping that a very fine thin line. Once I have all of the RV13 in there, then I'm coming in with the R20. I'm going to go right over the top of everything, the whole entire flower, the RV13, the whole 9 yards, and I'm going to blend that out. I'm going to call it good with that. I just want these to be a nice, delicate pink color, so I'm not going to knock myself out with a whole bunch of Copic colors, and I can also bring in another color when I get ready to do my colored pencils and finish that off. I'm sure if you follow me at all, you've seen this pink combination before, so I'm sure you know how this is going to turn out. If you haven't, stay tuned. You're going to be surprised. All right, so this plumeria here that's on top, it is casting a shadow on the plumerias underneath it, so I'm adding that RV13 right along the edge there of that one on the bottom, but then I'm also going to do the same thing along those ridges with the RV13 that I did on that first one. I'm still trying to save myself as much white space as I can so I can come in with this R20. I do want to keep these light. Again, I'm going for a very nice, delicate pink flower. They're not going to have a very strong shade or shadow on them because they're just a delicate pink, and there isn't really anything that is casting a harsh shadow on it, so I don't need too much of that RV13, just enough to get that darkness in there, and then I'm going to call it good. It does get a little tricky as you get down here to the bottom. At least it did for me. Some of these started to tilt down towards the back side of the horse's or the unicorn's face. So I kind of had to add a little bit more of the RV13 in there. However, I'm still, again, trying to make sure that I save enough of that R20 as I possibly can. I'm just going to continue to work my way down here. There's always going to be that line on the flower, the one that you're working on, of the RV13, because of the flower above it is casting a shadow. So the first thing I do is take that RV13 and draw that line in there. You're building your fence. You're creating that separation between the two where that shadow is with that RV13. It's the first thing I do, and then I can finish coloring in the rest of the flower like I did that first one up there on the top. Once I have all of those colored in, now I can work over here on the right hand side. There isn't very many of these plumeria on this side of the headpiece, and there isn't any on the rest of the headpiece. Now, there are some of those flowers on the back side of this headpiece. It might be a little tricky to decide what flowers those are exactly. If you wanted to add in some coloring on any of those back there that look like the plumeria color combination, you're welcome to do so. I didn't because I already had a plan. Before I even started coloring this in, I had the plan. I knew what these flowers were going to look like, and I knew what colors they were going to be in because I knew what I was shooting for on my color scheme, and the flowers were first and foremost. So I didn't add any of the pink from the plumerias on the rest of those, but hang in there with me. You'll see what I do instead. I do want to color in the stamen or the center of this flower with a Stettler pen. It's pretty far back there. This is a dark gray. You could probably go with a little bit lighter gray. However, I knew that by the time I got done coloring the rest of these flowers that it wasn't going to look as dark as it does now. It looks kind of freaky deaky, but it's not. Hang in there with me. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about when I'm done coloring this in. Okay, so the second set of flowers that I'm going to color in, I have no idea what flowers these are, but I'm going to color these in a slightly different pinkish red combination. I'm starting with the R22. I'm going in where that darkest shade would be. There's going to be some shade along the horn there. On the left hand side, there's going to be some shade there because I'm going to add some there to make it look like this petal has curved. It also curves up over onto itself. So I made sure that I added just a really fine line of that R22 there, and then again along the horn over the top of that stamen. I blended that out with the R20, and then I'm going to call that good with those. They really don't need a whole bunch of colors in order to make them work. I am bringing the Stettler back in to clean that up just a wee bit. I got some of that wasn't very even and didn't look quite right, so I did bring that Stettler back in to clean that up. Okay, so the flower down here on the bottom, I want it to be the same as the one that I had just done. I'm thinking threes here, folks. So I know that 3 of my flowers along the front of this headpiece are going to be a darker red. I have the plumeria over there on the right hand side. Since those are in a wee bit of a bunch, I can afford to leave those all in one area, but I need to break some of this up in 3s on this red. So I'm coming all the way down here at the bottom, and I'm adding again this R22 where I want my darkest shade to be. This is hanging upside down. However, there's the flower above it that's also going to cast a little bit of a shadow on it. So I add the R22 there along the edges of these petals. I am leaving the very tips of these for the most part white. I don't want them to look like they're curled underneath or curling back on themselves. So I did not add any of that R22 there. And then I thought I was ready to move on, and I realized that there was actually a small portion of this flower up underneath the one above it. So I'm adding that R22 in there. Again, look how much white space I have left. I did bring it out a little bit towards the edges of the petals, but for the most part, I left most of this white because it can be. I do want these to read a little bit darker than the plumeria, and also I'm using different colors, so it is going to look a little bit darker. However, it doesn't need to be super duper dark. These are still kind of on the delicate side. I'm blending this out with the R20, and then some of those edges that I had left bare before, I'm taking that R20 and I'm adding it to the edge, and I bring it in towards the center of that petal, kind of in a V shape. Now, because I had so much white left here, I'm bringing in one more color on this instead of doing it all in just R22 and R20. At this point, I'm bringing in the R00, and I'm going to blend this out. I should have actually made sure that I had a much better blend on these than what I did. You can actually get a really lovely blend with these 3 colors. I didn't. I really don't have an excuse. I just didn't. I did come back with the R20 just a little bit more. However, I still have some pretty harsh blending going on here, folks. Now, the problem with that is when I come in with my colored pencils, I'm going to have to kind of work at this a little bit more than what was absolutely necessary. So just make sure that you get a really good blend on this before you do any of your colored pencil work. Now I decided up here on the back side of this to get my third color, or my third flower in this color in here. I'm going to add this to these that are on the back side. I don't know what these flowers are. I don't know if they belong to the other two that I have just done, but since I don't know and they don't look like they belong to anything else, I have the freedom to add this color in there, and it gives me the color balance that I need in this. I know that those three flowers sitting there on the front are going to be the darkest. They're going to look heavier, and I needed to make sure that they're broken up a little bit with another color, but threes are what stands out to your eye, so I'm making sure that I sneak that in there. I also decided on this one I was going to still add that R00. I really liked the finish on that flower down there at the bottom, so I'm going to do that on this one, and I'm going to go back to that other one that I had done the first time and add that R00 there. It does have a wee bit of a peachy undertone to it as opposed to the more pink of the R22 and the R20, so I did make sure that I added that to the first one that I had done so it blends just fine with the rest of them. Now, before I tackle these flowers, and to be perfectly honest, I was kind of delaying the inevitable. I didn't record all of this, folks, and I'm sorry I missed it. However, these are really, really simple leaves that I'm doing here. I got totally lazy, and so I made them super simple. I first started with that G29. Again, that is my darkest shade. So I added that where I would have had flowers overlapping them. I brought them up along one edge there and then blended that out just a little bit in light flicking motions. Then I brought in that G24, went over the top of that G29, blended that out a wee bit. Now I have a YG21. I'm going to finish that off. Now this is kind of a hard blend, folks, so I do have to come back in with my G24 right after I'm done with that YG21 and add just a little bit more of that, and that does finish off that blend really, really nicely. And again, I'm going to be coming in with my colored pencils, but I don't want to have to fight it or recolor the whole thing because I didn't do a good enough blend with my Copics. So by making sure that I'm going over the top of that with that G24 right after I come in with that YG21, that helps a bunch with that blend. So I have these little leaves here that are going to hang down in the front. I could have colored these in the same exact color that I had done on the other leaves. However, I felt like I should do just something a wee bit different in order to get a little bit more variety in here. So I started with the B34, added that where my darkest shade was going to go. I did bring it down a little bit. These are kind of tiny. They don't need a whole lot. That flower there overlaps those, so I added most of that B34 to that, but as I brought that down, and again, I just chose one edge of the leaf with that B34, brought that down along that edge. When I was done with the B34, I came in with the YG17, went over the top of the B34, brought it out a little bit. Now I only have a tiny bit left, and I'm going to finish that off with the YG03. This is a really nice complement to that YG21, but it's not a perfect match. It's just nice enough. It gives it a little bit of a difference. And I did go over all of the B34 and YG13 with that YG03 and then called it a day. Now I'm ready to color in the last of my flowers here. I knew that these were going to be a little bit more work than the rest of them, so I did save them for last. And also I was trying to decide exactly what reds I wanted specifically. So I am using the BV23. I'm coming up right from the center of this flower, right where one petal is meeting up with another petal, and flicking that out. And I'm right up there on the tip of my marker when I bring that flick out. I do want these pretty fine, pretty thin. I don't want big fat lines of BV23 in here. It's going to make it way too dark, so I am trying to be careful with that and just use up as much of the tip of my marker as I can. There's a few flower or petals here up front that curve up onto themselves. So I'm adding some of that shade right there at the base of, or right there at the center of this flower. And then where that curves as well onto itself, I'm just adding very thin lines there. Those wouldn't have a lot of shadow coming from the tip of the curve towards the center of the flower. So I'm just adding a tiny bit with the tip of my marker. Again, the same thing with that petal next to it. The This petal that I'm working on here, this one is a little bit more wide open. So I'm starting right there at the center of that flower and flicking out. You can see that not all of my lines are the same length. You don't want them to do that. Walls of color are not a good thing in flowers because that's not how nature works. So I'm trying to make sure that I vary the length of those flicks as the best as I can. And I'm also trying to follow the shape of that petal. So if it looks like it's curving in on itself or towards the center, I bring that flick towards the center itself. And I'm making sure that I have enough variation in those flicks that once I start coloring over the top of it with the rest of my colors, it's not these super dark walls of color. You're going to see the BV23. It's not going to look like BV23, but you're going to see it when it's done. So it's super important that you get those variations of flicks in there. After the BV23, I'm coming in with this R29. I'm going right over the top of the BV23 and extending it past that just a little bit. Now I'm going to just repeat the same steps as I did when I did that BV23. Just this time I have the R29. Now you may have noticed that I have left some of these petals completely bare. This one that's up by my pointer finger on my right hand, I haven't touched that one yet. It is curled in on itself, but I'm not going to touch that one yet with the R29. And I'm not touching it with the R29 because I have that petal that's underneath it, but it's kind of next to it that has the R29 on it. If I add R29 to the one that's folded up, they're going to look like one big petal. So in order to avoid that, I'll skip the R29 and I will add the shade onto that petal where it curves there with the R27, but we'll talk about that more here in just a moment. Now I am kind of taking it a wee bit easy with these because I do want to make sure that I'm leaving myself plenty of white space here. I do know that this is going to be a dark, heavy flower. All three of them are going to be. However, I do want to make sure that it does have enough light in it that they don't look like three blobs as opposed to three flowers. So in order to get that, I need to make sure that I'm leaving enough white space that by the time I get to my R24, it's going to read much lighter. It's still going to be a dark red flower. However, I will have those lighter areas in contrast to my shaded areas. So you're going to see all of that shape and definition in there. Now I did forget this little petal underneath here. This one's going to get quite a bit of this R29. It's got a leaf or several leaves and a petal covering it. So it's going to get quite a bit of that 29 in there. Now I'm coming in with my R27. Again, the same thing that I had just done. I go in right over the top of that BV23 and the R29, blend that out. But again, I still have quite a bit of that white left. I need that white. I don't want to cover all that up. Now this petal here, the one I had talked about a few moments ago, now I add the R27 to that just right along that edge where it starts to curve. Then I flick up towards the center in a kind of a V shape, and I leave a white space that is also a V shape. It's just reversed. Think of it as a puzzle piece. And then I'll go over the top of that with the R24 and blend that out when I'm ready. Now, some of these centers are going to seem like you don't have a lot of white space left. You do want to have just a wee bit left in there. Not all of these are going to read 100% dark. Although they are curled up onto themselves, they're still going to have some light that hits them. It's not going to be a whole lot, but you're going to still have some. So it's really important to make sure that you're leaving a little bit of white down there in the center of those petals that are curled up there. I'm also making sure that I'm getting a really good blend in all of these colors, folks. Again, I can't say it enough. These are going to be really heavy and they need to have a really good blend. So when I'm coloring this, I am taking a moment here and there to eyeball a few things and make sure that everything has a really nice blend. Now, it's not going to look super duper clean because it's not done. However, I do want to make sure that it's at least blended really well. The rest of it I can address later with my colored pencils, but it does need to be blended well. Now that I'm done with the R27, I'm coming in with the R24. At this point, it's kind of fun because you're gonna kind of just go for the gold and get this colored in because everything else is done. But again, look and see that I'm over there on the side of my marker, folks, and I am making sure that it's getting a really good coat of that R24 over the top of the BV23, the R29, and that R27. I am making sure that I'm using just the tip of my marker to get along the edges of those petals there so I don't color on anything else or on the white of my card panel. But outside of that, I am making sure that I'm giving this a really good coat with that R24. If I need to wait a moment or two until everything is dry or settled back a little bit, I can come in again with this R24 and go over it one more time, because this blend is going to be so important when I come in with my colored pencils. I do not want to have to recolor these flowers completely with colored pencils. They are fairly detailed flowers. There's quite a bit going on here with these flowers, and I don't want to have to redo them. It'll just make so much work, and then what was the point of even coloring in with my Copics anyway? So I did forget this leaf down there, or I'm sorry, this petal down here that's tucked up underneath that. So I did finish it off with my R24. What you don't see is I actually come in with my R27 and add quite a bit more of that over that BV23 and that R29 down there. It needs to go quite a bit darker underneath there because there is a lot of shadow being casted by the images around it. So I do need to make sure that that's pretty dark. I'm also going to concentrate there quite a bit with my colored pencils to make sure I get that darkness in there as well. So I'm just going to repeat the same thing with these other two flowers as I did with the first one. However, the only difference is on the first one, I took it one petal at a time to make sure that I had enough separation in these that I didn't confuse myself. On this one, I'm not, or on these two, I'm not going to. I'm going to knock both of these out at the same time. If you struggle a little bit or if this feels overwhelming to you, I highly suggest that you slow down and you take this one petal at a time. And by that, I mean you would go in with the BV23, then your R29, 27, 24, then move on to the next petal. It does take a little bit longer, folks, but it is a surefire way to keep yourself on track, and then you don't start coloring things that you don't mean to color. I don't know about you, but I sometimes need all the help that I can get, so I totally get it if you need to slow down. That does not make you a bad colorist. It does not mean anything is wrong. It just means that you're using your smarticles and coloring in the best way possible. So while I finished coloring this up, speaking of coloring and efficiency, I had done a video last week about quick Copic coloring. And the point to that was that, yes, sometimes things take a while to color in, but there are ways you can help yourself become a quicker and more efficient colorist. However, a friend of mine later on that day shared a comment from one of her followers who asked her how long it took her to make her card because she noticed that mid-video, my friend's fingernail polish changed. And she also made the comment that she doesn't always like to color because she feels like it takes her too long and the rest of us can move quickly. Here's the things, folks. Here's what you guys don't see or what you don't know about us. Sometimes we just stop in the middle of what we're doing and do things like color our finger or paint our fingernails. It doesn't mean that the card has taken us a long time. It means that we just decided mid-video that we were going to stop and paint our fingernails, and it all actually happens in a single day or in a matter of hours. So don't always assume that you're bad at what you do because we're quick at what we do, because this is editing, folks. This is magic. This is what you don't know. So by all means, don't hold yourself back just because you're under the impression we're better than you are, because we're not necessarily better. We just have the power of editing to make it look like we're super spectacular. We're not. All right, anyway, moving on. I am just about done coloring these in, and then I can start working on the center of these flowers. Now, I'm going to choose the same cool grays on these flowers as I did for the ears and the nostrils, because I need to have a little bit of that color balance. Now, I am going to warm up the ears and the nostrils to be a little bit more cohesive with the horse, and I don't necessarily need to do that with the centers of these flowers, because I do have the gray stamen behind that first flower there, and these are dark and heavy flowers, so they can hold some dark and heavy color on the center of them. I am starting with the C7, and I'm stippling the centers of these, so I'm going in there on the tip of my marker and just kind of tapping, creating these little dots and kind of building up those dots till I get them in the shape that I want them. Now, in this case, I need them in mostly a C shape, and I'm going to start this flower here, start at the top and work my way around the side, but you can see I've left the center nice and white, because after that C7, I come in with the C5, I go right over the top of that C7 with that C5 and bring that out. So I'm basically doing the same thing as you would with a flicking motion. I'm just doing this with a with stippling with dots instead of flicks. Now, I accidentally picked up my C1 and started coloring that in over the top of the C5 and the C7 and realized that that wasn't right, so I stopped and picked up my C3. Now I'm going over the top of that C7 and that C5. Fortunately, I didn't get so far ahead of myself with the C1 that I lightened up too much of that C5 and C7, because I don't want that. Again, I want to keep those nice and dark, and I'll have some more work to do on them here pretty soon. In the meantime, I'm going to get started on my colored pencil work here. I have a dark brown Prismacolor, and I'm going to add this right underneath where these flowers are hanging over the unicorn's face. That's going to cast quite a bit of shadow, and because I wanted this to be more of a light tan unicorn, I do need to have a wee bit of a darker brown shadow. That's going to be quite a bit of shadow casted from those, as well as where this mane hangs over the unicorn's face. Sorry, folks, I'm a Montana girl. It's forever going to be horse. It's not a unicorn. We don't have unicorns in Montana. We have horses. So I'm going to do it right over where that mane is hanging over the unicorn's face, just in a really nice thin line for the time being. I'm basically doing the same thing with this dark brown as I did when I started using my Copics on this. I can always build it up, and I'm definitely taking advantage of that approach. I want to build this up as I go. I don't want it to go super duper heavy out the gate, because I'm still trying to get the idea across that this is actually a really light tan unicorn. So I'm going to go in super fine lines, and then I'll build that up as I go. Now, along this eye here, I'm taking this dark brown. I go from the corner up towards the center, on the other corner of the eye up towards the center, and I kind of leave a gap right there in the center. But I also want to take this dark brown underneath where the eye is closed. That's going to be recessed a little bit. Plus, we also have the shadow of those eyelashes, so I can add some of the dark brown there. Come back down along that jawline and build that up. I do bring it out a little bit in very tight circular motions. Now, I am at all times using a very light hand, and hopefully you can see that I have a very sharp pencil here. That is going to be the key. These are nice, fine, thin lines in here, folks. This is a very delicate, these are delicate lines and delicate shapes along the edges of this unicorn. So I need to have that fine pencil so I can get to those nice, clean, fine lines of the shape. I'm also going to go up alongside the bridge of the nose with this and kind of build that up, add a little bit more shadow and definition there. Along that lower lip, we're going to have some definition and shadow there as well. I do decide to come back up around this eye and bring it out just a wee bit, but I am using a much, much, much lighter hand in order to do that, because again, we're blending this out to white in order for this to look like a light brown horse. So I'm trying to keep that in mind as I go. After I'm done with that dark brown, I'm going to bring in a burnt ochre. Now, this is going to be a wee bit on the warm side, and I'm purposely choosing a little bit of warmth to go with this because I do want this to warm up just a wee bit. I didn't want this to look too cool because this, well, it's a living unicorn, and I think of warmth when I think of unicorns. So I did want to warm this up just a wee bit. You could use a light brown if you would like. That's going to be just a tad bit on the cooler side than this burnt ochre, but it will work just fine. So you can definitely use that if that's what you have on hand. Again, I'm going right over the top of that dark brown and I'm bringing it out just a teensy bit. And I have the lightest hand ever. I am not drawing in or coloring in any detail specifically with this pencil. I'd already done that with my dark brown. I don't need it to with the burnt ochre. So I can have a super light hand. And if I need to, I can do like I just did underneath those flowers along that eye there. I can just continue to go back and forth and build that up until I get it exactly where I want it. Now I'm coming in with the beige, and in most of these areas, I can barely touch the paper with this. I want just a tiny bit more in order to bring in some of that gap of that white paper. It needs to have just a wee bit of color on it. Now, I probably could not have gotten it that light with my Copics. I wasn't willing to try to get it that light with my Copics, and this beige works out perfectly with that. I'm also not going over the top of all of that dark brown or that burnt ochre. I don't need to. Now, along this hairline here, I wanted a little bit better blend where I had the E50 along the bridge of the nose here. I'm going over the top of that and just lightly sketching it out. Now look how far back my fingers are on this pencil. That makes sure that I have the lightest hand ever. I'm also coloring in these nostrils. I am going over the top of everything. I still have a light hand, but I'm going to go over the top of it and it's going to warm that up. Those nostrils aren't going to look quite as stark as what they did. Now, some of these lines weren't so spectacular from my Copic coloring because it's not always easy to get a nice perfect line with Copics. So I am kind of cleaning that up with a Prismacolor. It was 70% gray. This is a 50% gray, just blending that out just a tiny bit. Then a 30%. And then I'm going to go right over the top of that with that beige to warm that up. And those are perfect. They're nice and clean. They look cohesive. That's exactly what I wanted. I don't want them to look like his nose or her nose is sitting on top of her face. I need it to look like her nostrils are a part of her face. So going in with that beige definitely helps give me that look. And it also helps compensate for the fact that I did not use warm grays. I used the cool grays instead. So that helps a bunch. Now I am also using quite a bit of pressure here on this beige along the very edge of her nose here, kind of bringing that up. However, I do have my hand pretty far back on the pencil, and I'm doing that because although I can't get tons and tons of pressure as if I'm holding it like this, I can hold it off to the side enough that I can put just enough pressure on it. It's going to give me more of a sketchy look, but I'm also going to lay down more color at the same time. So I'm coloring in the ears the same way I did the nostrils. However, I skipped the 70% cool gray. I don't know why I didn't use warm gray Prismacolors on these. In my mind, because I used cool markers, I needed to use cool pencils, and then I was thinking I need to go over the top of them with the beige to warm that up a little bit and make them look cohesive to the unicorn. It's dumb because that's not how that works. You can absolutely use warm gray pencils over cool markers, and it probably would work and look just a wee bit better. So if you have warm gray pencils, you use the warm gray 50% and 30%, finish it off with your beige, and then you're good to go. In fact, I think I'm going to make sure that I have warm gray pencils listed on the PDF for you guys, so you make sure that you actually have those on hand instead of cool gray pencils. All right, so I'm going to finish up the ears here, and then I'm going to start coloring in these flowers, and I'm going to show you that flower that's hanging right down there on the bottom, and then I'm going to talk about this background after I walk you through this one, because I didn't show you how I did it. I was actually kind of winging it on that background, but I'll talk about that more here in just a second. I have the Prismacolor in Black Grape. Now, Black Grape is pretty dark, and I actually wanted that darkness because I have the darkness in those red flowers. However, if you don't have the Black Grape, the Prismacolor Dark Purple will work just fine. However, the dark purple is going to lend more towards a pinky pink than what you might like. It'll work. It's just going to look a wee bit more pink, even over the top of that R22. And I am making sure that I'm sticking to the areas that I had the R22. Now, earlier I talked about my blend on these flowers. Here's where I'm going to start to see that I have a little bit of a problem with my blend. I can now see the difference between that R20 and that R00, and that is no bueno. I don't want that. I really needed that smooth blend, and I got ahead of myself and I didn't give it. So my advice to you is make sure that you have those good blends, folks, and then you don't have to work so hard. I am making sure that I'm drawing these nice, thin, fine, clean lines with that Black Grape, and then I'm going to bring that out in those tight circular motions, and I'm going in the same shape over the top of everything that I had with R22. Once I have that done, and now I'm going to bring in the Prismacolor in Carmine Red, and I'm going over the top of that Black Grape, and I'm blending that out. Now, had I a good blend on this in my Copics, I actually wouldn't need to blend this Carmine out as much as I am. I am almost completely coloring in these flowers. That's a ludicrous. So there's no reason for me to have to do this. I just got careless with my blend. So again, folks, I cannot stress to you enough, make sure that you got a good blend on there. I also make sure that I have a really sharp pencils here, and I'm going in with a very, very light hand. These flowers already have light enough Copics underneath them. It's not going to take a whole lot to lay down these colors, especially that Black Grape. It's already a dark color. The Carmine Red is actually a fairly dark color. It doesn't take much of this to get it down on this paper, so I don't need to have a heavy hand. I do want to make sure that I'm covering up all of that Black Grape because this Carmine Red alters that Black Grape and it gives it more of a reddish purple look as opposed to just a purple or dark purple look, which is exactly what I want. I wanted these to be a little bit more on the reddish pinkish side as opposed to purple or as opposed to red. And the Carmine Red and Black Grape together are just gorgeous. They're gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous pinky red. It's perfect. I do come back in with that Black Grape after I've sharpened my pencil again and clean up those lines to make sure that they're nice and sharp, nice and clean, because these are our finishing touches on our petals, folks, and they're going to have really nice, clean, crisp lines on them. Say that 10 times fast. All right, so while I finish up these other two flowers in the same color, let's talk about this background. I started with the R22. I used the R20 and the R01 just like I did on those other flowers. And I started with that R22, went around the whole perimeter of my unicorn here, just in a very fine, thin line. After I had that thin line, I did go back around and kind of very carefully flick in very short, stumpy flicking motions out and up. So it's going straight up and it's going straight down. So I go straight up halfway, about the halfway mark of my unicorn, up towards the top of my card panel, and then go down on the lower half of my card panel towards the unicorn's chin. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you can see which direction my flicks ran. Then I blended that out with the R20 and then again with that R01. Now these are this is the same color as these flowers here that are around the perimeter of my unicorn's headpiece. However, because I'm doing the colored pencils on the flowers and not the background, they're not going to look like they are the same exact colors, and that's perfect. I did not have to pick other colors to go with my blending combinations or the final look of this card. It automatically matches it, but it has enough difference in it you can't even tell that they are the same colors. I made sure that I blended it out pretty far because I did want this to look like it had a fairly decent background on it. However, I did not want to take up the whole entire panel either. Once I was done with that, I did stamp some of the little stars that were in the stamp set in more Inkon3 fade out ink, and then I colored those in with the R20, and I called that good. So now I'm going to color in these plumeria. This time I do have the Prismacolor in dark purple. This one is a little bit more on the pinkish side, and that is perfect because I wanted these flowers to be more pink. I'm going right in where I had that RV13, and this time I am absolutely making sure that this pencil is super duper sharp. In fact, I'll sharpen this pencil a couple of times before I'm done coloring in these plumeria, because I needed these lines to be super crisp and super clean, because that's what's going to give us the shape of these flowers. Plumeria have very nice sharp clean lines in real life, and I definitely wanted to play that up. Plus I think they're just a darling flower, so I really wanted to make sure that these stood out in their own right and they were nice and clean. So with the sharp to edge of my pencil, I'm going right along those ridges, or that rib of the lighter pink in the flower. I sketch that line in, and then I go right down there in the center where those petals meet up in the center, and I'll come out in very light circular motions. Now they're packed in there pretty tight, so I'm making sure that I'm getting a nice layer of color in there, but I have a very, very light hand. Now some of these flowers, or some of these petals down here in the back, they're going to be almost completely colored in with this dark purple, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That, instead of going in and trying to get that packed in there with that RV13, I knew I could bring my colored pencils in and do the work there and get the shade that I wanted. That RV13 underneath this dark purple is one of my favorites. I just love how it looks, and I love how delicate these turn out. It's one of my favorites. I'm also making sure that I'm reinforcing any of those shadows that would be casted from petals that hang above another one. So I'm making sure that I run that line right up next to the petal that would be on top of the petal that I'm currently coloring. And again, this is where it's so important to make sure that you have a really sharp pencil. That sharp pencil is going to make sure that those lines stay super duper fine. If your pencil is getting dull or too fat, you're going to start coloring over the top of the majority of your flower or some of your flower, and then it's not going to look like you have shadows casted at all. It's just going to start looking like you have a blob for a flower, and that would be a really big disappointment. So I'm making sure that my pencil stays nice and sharp when I'm adding those lines in there, and that's also going to create more definition and more separation between each of these flowers, and they're going to start looking like they're stacked on top of one another. Now, another alternative is you could definitely add more shadow. I'd still keep your pencil sharp, and you could add more shadow to these flowers that are underneath these ones here on the top. So the ones that are going down closer to the unicorn's face, you could definitely add more shadow to those, fill those in with that dark purple that much more. Those are going to look like they start to recede back further away towards the horse's face, and they're going to look really groovy. However, I really just wanted to keep these just a little bit more on the lighter side, a little bit more on the delicate side. Now I'm coming in with a Prismacolor and Carmine Red, and yes, I just use this on the flower over there on the right hand side, those other three flowers, I'm sorry. But look at the difference in these flowers. This is the difference between using certain Copics on one set of flowers and certain Copics on other set of flowers. There's also the difference between using the black grape and the dark purple. So I'm actually using a lot of the same supplies. However, I'm getting a different look out of it, which I think is really groovy. And then you don't have to have a bunch of stuff, but you get a lot of different things, which I think is so cool. So I'm going over the top of that dark purple with the Carmine Red and just blending that out just a little bit, not a whole lot. I did leave quite a bit of that R20 to show through on these, and I'm not coloring any of the ridges on this. There probably would be just a little bit of shade and shadow in the centers of these flowers, but I decided to leave those. I don't know why. I just decided that I didn't want to color those in, and I wanted to leave those ridges as light as I possibly could and with nothing on them, and I think they turned out just fine. So again, I'm making sure that this pencil is really sharp and I have a really light hand. I do have this sped up, folks, because out of all the flowers on this card, these are probably the easiest to do. They're just going to follow the shape of the flower itself. And because they don't have a lot of bends and movements like the other flowers do, they're pretty easy to figure out. They're also really good practice to get down into those nooks and crannies and blend out in those really nice tight circular motions and get good blends on those. And also when I colored these flowers in, I did make sure that I had a really good Copic blend on them, and that helped a bunch too. I do, before I stop coloring these, I do kind of take a moment here and there, make sure that I have all of my coloring done in the areas that I need it to have it done. And once I'm satisfied with those, I can start coloring in these darker red flowers. Now, I am back with the Prismacolor in dark purple, so I've already used these on the flowers underneath, or those plumerias, but I'm going to get a completely different color out of this because I am going over the top of that BV23 with it. So it's going to look like I have more shade in these red flowers instead of a purple pencil, which is handy dandy notebook. Again, I'm going right over the top of everything I had done with that BV23. I have a sharp pencil and a light hand, and I'm just barely going in there. But I am also making sure that I'm cleaning up my edges of my petals. That petal that's there by my pointer finger, you can see I ran it up along the edge of that one that is folded over onto itself. I needed to clean that up a little bit. I need these lines to be nice and sharp. We do have very clean, sharp looking petals. That's what they're supposed to look like. These aren't petals that are kind of raggedy, and we need to make sure that they're nice and cleaned up. That's also going to help them stand out on your project quite a bit more if you make sure that you have very clean, crisp lines, and colored pencils are a perfect way to achieve that. I'm also going to speed this up here in just a moment, folks, because really at this point, the only thing that I'm doing is following the same lines that I have already put down with my Copic markers. I'm not going to do anything new or anything fancy here. I don't need to do that. We are just adding those final touches and those details and getting these darling flowers cleaned up so they look nice and spiffy. So I really don't need to walk you through it. One of the things that I really found exciting about this stamp set is all of the possible coloring combinations you could use to color in this unicorn. Really, I mean, you think of the combination and you could absolutely do it. And you could color this unicorn any color you wanted. One of my daughters recommended that I color it in purple. While I wasn't going to do purple for this particular one because I already had a recipient in mind and I knew that she wasn't to head up about purple, she's not wrong. Like, you could do this in purple. You could do a rainbow mane. You could do rainbow flowers. You could start with the pink down there at the bottom on the left-hand side and work your way over to purple plumerias, and that would be groovy. Really, the sky is the limit on this unicorn. I'm usually one and go or one and done card maker. I usually don't do more than one, but I really look forward to using this stamp again and coloring it in different colors. In fact, I think I'm going to do a layout in my Canvo with this stamp for one of my monthly covers and do it in a different color, maybe March, because I think greens would be really cool on this too. After I was done with that dark purple on these red flowers, I'm coming in with crimson red. I'm going right over the top of that dark purple, blending that out just a little bit. I'm also adding this crimson red to those areas where I had just the R27 and the R24, but I'm just going over the top of that R27 and blending that out, and then I'm going to call it good. Really, at this point, this crimson red is just that finishing touch to help bridge that gap between between that dark purple and the rest of the Copic coloring. It's almost a perfect match. You almost can't tell that it's there. You can tell when it's not, but once it's there, unless you have something to compare it to, it's kind of hard to see it. However, I definitely would never ever skip this because I absolutely love this look with these red flowers. So I'm just going to add those on there and I'm going to call it good. That went really quick. Even though I had it sped up in real life, it went really quick as well. It didn't need a whole lot. Now I'm going to color the leaves on this, and I'm going to actually, even though I use different colors to color in the leaves, I'm going to use pretty much the same color on all of the leaves. I went in with the IndigoBlu and went right where I would have had that G29, and then I'm going to finish this off with the lime peel. I'm going right over the top of that IndigoBlu out into that G24, just a tiny bit, sharp pencil, light hand, and then I'm going to call that good. I do want that YG21 to shine through because it is a gorgeous yellow green, and we don't need to completely cover up these leaves. On these leaves, I'm back with that IndigoBlu, going in where I had that B34 right up underneath that red flower, as well as along the edge of these leaves. Again, I had just picked an edge. It was the one that was the furthest away from me, where it looked like the leaf was tilted away. And then I'm going to blend that out with the Prismacolor in apple green. Now, I did decide I didn't like how rough these leaves were looking. That was my fault when I did the Copic coloring. So I did color over the top of the leaf entirely with that apple green and clean that up. Now I'm good to go. Okay, so now I'm going to start coloring in the mane here. I have the Prismacolor in dark purple, and yes, I'm using purple over browns, and I'm using purple over browns because this is going to help me push those darker areas even darker without getting out a heavy dark brown. I can use this dark purple first. I can go down with this, and I am definitely concentrating on areas that when I'm done, I know that they're going to recede further back, and that's perfect. This is what's going to help give me that movement in this mane. It's going to actually look like she has some beautiful flowing locks here, and that's exactly what I want. And I can't necessarily do that with just a dark brown pencil. It just starts to look flat. It's not quite the same. So I'm going to start with this dark purple, go in where I want those darkest shaded areas to be, where I want that shadow up underneath these flowers. That's going to help these flowers pop out even further away from her mane. It's going to actually make them look like they have some more dimension to them. It will push the mane back a little bit, but it's going to make the flowers look like they're actually sitting on top of it quite a bit more, and that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. When I'm done with this dark purple, then I can go over the top of it with a darker brown pencil, but I don't have to knock myself out with a super dark brown pencil. I still get the warmth that I'm looking for in my finished product. I still get the dark and I still get the depth, but it doesn't look super duper flat. So this is the Prismacolor in dark umber. This is actually a pretty dark brown pencil, but it's not dark enough. And I don't want to go gray. So by putting this over the top of that dark purple, I get that depth. I get that darkness. But watch, when I use this dark umber by itself, it doesn't look quite as dark as it does going over the top of that dark purple. So I'm actually getting multiple colors out of this one pencil, and I'm getting the depth and the variation out of only using two pencils, which is perfect. It helps a ton. I definitely want to push some of these areas back further and further, and I need the combination of those two. But there's some of them that aren't going to be as far back. And again, this is just one of those moments where I'm kind of eyeballing this, folks. This is just something I do. It's not something I think about. So as I'm coloring this in, although you can't see it because I have it sped up, I'm just like I just did. I held my pencil there for a second and I'm like, okay, where else can I put this? Where do I want this? And this is the burnt ochre. So this is going to add another layer of color, a little bit more variation and movement into it. Plus, it's going to warm it up just a teensy weensy bit, and that is excellent. I don't have to bring out a bunch of colors in order to make this work for me. Okay, so now that our mane is done, I think all I have left to do is her horn. So I'm bringing in the Prismacolor again in dark umber, and this feels really dark because what I had just done on the mane there, except I don't have any dark purple underneath it, so it's actually going to feel a whole lot lighter. I'm going in right where I would have had that Y28, but I have a super duper light hand and a really sharp pencil. So I'm just at this point, I'm just cleaning up those lines and getting that blend just a wee bit more. It seems like this isn't going to be a gold horn, but by the time I'm done, this is actually a gold horn. So bear with me. I'm making sure that I run this along the edges there that run down the sides of the horn, so it pushes that back a little bit more, gives it a little bit more rounded appearance. Again, I'm making sure that the separations in the horn, that it gets just a little bit of that. My hand is so light. I don't need to add a ton of that. Now I'm coming in with the Prismacolor and Terracotta. I missed a few areas here, so I'm actually coming back in with dark umber. Just kidding. But I am going to use the Terracotta, and I'm going to go right over the top of that dark umber. Again, the section here that is in between these flowers that has all of the shade, I'm making sure I go quite a bit darker with that. And for some reason, I'm totally obsessing over the shape and the lines of that horn. I don't know why. After I'm done with that terracotta, I bring the Prismacolor in cream and go right across that highlight there, and voila, we have a gold horn on our unicorn. Now I wanted a little bit more definition on the centers of these flowers, so I'm actually coming in with a dark gray Staedtler pen, and I am just stippling this in here. Now this is where all of my C7 would have been, and I'm just going in there with dots. I know I have this sped up, but I'm going just straight up and down with my pen there, just dot, dot, dot. I go down and then I come straight back up, and then I move over just a tiny bit and then straight down and straight back up, and then I call it good once I get all of that shade in where I want it. I am also going to bring in a light gray Prismacolor. Totally ignore the numbers on my Prismacolors, folks. They're not right. I was just dinking around. Don't worry about it. I am bringing in a light gray, and I'm going to stipple that on there. It's going to be kind of hard to see, and it's probably not necessary. I could see it just enough. I kind of liked it, and it did add just a wee bit more texture to those. So I felt that that was totally worth it, but you don't necessarily need to use the light gray. I did end up adding a couple more of these stars. Again, this was the Inkon3 Fadeout ink, and then I'm going to color this in with the R20 and call those good. Once that ink dries back, you're not even going to be able to tell that I stamped those stars on there. They're going to look like they are a part of the background, which is groovy. I wanted to have a little bit starker highlights on my red flowers here, so I do have a Pablo white pencil. You could use a Prismacolor white pencil if you have it. I chose the Pablo white because I needed it to be just a wee bit more translucent. I didn't want them super stark. I did want something that kind of popped a little bit. Nothing super stark. If you use a Prismacolor white, I would go with a fairly light hand, folks. Build that color up. After it does sit for a little bit, it does kind of take on some of that color underneath it, which is cool. However, it's not hard to get carried away with that Prismacolor and the white. The Pablo is generally a better choice for that. I have one last thing to share with you, and this is the grooviest thing ever. Fluorite also sent me some liquid pixie dust, and I love this stuff because I love me some shimmer. This stuff is so cool. So it is literally a liquid shimmer. It is in this dropper, and you have a couple of options on how you could use it. I could definitely load this up on a paintbrush and splatter it on my project. I would cover up my unicorn here. I could do that with it. You can also put it in these water brushes. This one also came from Inkon3. You could put it inside there and squirt it out just like you would a Nuvo Aqua, Shimmer Pen, or Spectrum Noir, or Wink of Stella. Since this was the first time I played with it, I just loaded it up on a acrylic block. I just put some of the shimmer pixie dust on an acrylic block, loaded up the tip of my marker with it, and then just added it this way. I like a wee bit more control with my shimmer, which is part of the reason why I use Nuvo Aqua shimmers so much. But this stuff was really cool. I could think of so many applications with this. You could just go crazy, and the shimmer on it is just gorgeous. It's more of a neutral shimmer. I don't see gold one or silver one way or another. It feels very neutral to me, which is cool. I love that. And it doesn't rub off, which is also really cool. In fact, what I didn't use on my acrylic block, I left it there to dry, and then I came back later and ran my finger over the top of it, and it did not come off on my finger at all. Like, there was no glitter, there was no residue of glitter. It just dried as it was, and I love that. And plus, the shimmer that I could add to the details on my flowers were just off the hook. I don't remember if I get a good shot of that at the end of this video or not. I might, so definitely stay tuned for that. But I'm just digging this stuff. I would love to put this in this aqua pen. I haven't yet because I just got it and I was just playing with it at this point. But I think it would be really, really cool to put it in this aqua pen and use it just like I do my Nuvo. This is definitely going to be somewhat of a go-to for me in the future. Lately, I've been doing a lot of art prints that I don't put this kind of stuff on it, but when I need to reach for something like this, I will definitely pick this up. And at some point, I definitely want to come up with a card layout where I can just splatter this across the front of the card panel. I think that would be so groovy, and I do love me some shimmer. And yes, you can actually see it right here, and in just a moment, I'm going to pick this up and you can really see how much shimmer is on this. And I will also have Inkon3 linked down in the description below, as well as on my blog, as well as Patreon. So definitely go check her out. It is a super duper fabulous. And that is it, folks. We are done. We are good to go. I have more details and links down in the description below, as well as in today's post on Patreon. Remember, there is a PDF available with a detailed supply list, so do be sure to check that out. I hope you enjoyed my project today. If you did, hit that like button here on Patreon, and also be sure to leave me a comment because I love to hear from you. Thanks again so much for joining me. Until next time.